I'm Antonio Tijerino with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. I started when I came into this country. I was very young. I remember I got off a plane, and then very next morning, I was in first grade. I didn't speak a word of English. I remember I just didn't fit when I got here from Nicaragua. I missed everything that was the weather, the palm trees, the food, the warmth of people. And then I was in Washington, D.C., where everything was very different. And they left me back in first grade. And that's the irony of it, is because now my Spanish is terrible, but at that point, it's all I had. And I remember that I was able to come back in everything that the kids made fun of me with Roberto Clemente, who was my inspiration because he was the best baseball player in the world at that time. And I was able to at least have someone that I clung to. It's like an imaginary but real friend that I was able to throw back at them in a way of defending myself and clinging to my culture in some way with an element of pride, because that actually gets banged up a little bit when somebody is attacking you for your very culture. And then something interesting happened. I remember then you adjust, and I would adjust with these kids and with my life here in the United States. And then I'd go back and visit Nicaragua, and all of a sudden I didn't fit in there. My Spanish wasn't as good. Now my clothes were different. That saying, ni de aquí, ni de allá, I suddenly didn't quite fit in where I came from. And then there was civil war in Nicaragua, and I was sent back to the United States. And I had to stay with an aunt, the nearest family relative or friend of a family. And it was out in the middle of rural Illinois. And now I really didn't belong again, this time in the United States, because it was very rural. I came from an urban environment in Washington, D.C., and I had to readjust again. And that's what we're all doing in this wonderful country, is we're all adjusting and adjusting and adjusting. But that heritage, it ebbs and flows, that cultural pride, depending on what part of your life you're in. And I remember where it wasn't necessarily the biggest part of my identity, but it became more and more, the more I was attacked again, this time in terms of being made fun of by other students in this kind of rural setting. I remember when a gym teacher would say, I'd come out of the showers and he'd say, "Hey, your back's still wet. Get it? You're a wetback." And that was a moment when I saw that the other kids that were making fun of me stopped making fun of me, because now the grownups were saying things like, "I smell beans." And I'd walk into the room, they're like, "You left a trail of grease," and things like that. And so that then changed, where there was a little more empathy when you have grown men and women making fun of a child. But I was on my own. It was just my brother and I. And I remember asking a girl to prom or homecoming, one of those things. And she actually said yes, which I was thrilled about. And when I was going to pick her up, she said, "I think we can get away with it." I said, "Get away with what?" "I think we can get away with you being Italian. You have an O at the end of your first name and O at the end of your last name. So just pretend to be Italian. Otherwise, my parents won't let me go." And I did not go on that date, but I became very, very Latino I remember that being a defining moment. Whereas before, sometimes you don't want to be pigeonholed as Latino. And I think some of us go through that. But at that very moment, I started digging into my culture. I was more defiant in who I was, and it started shaping me. And then went on to college. At college, I was part of the Latino Student Union. I was part of every group that I could find. And again, this is where you start almost fomenting your identity. And a lot of it is through your culture. And when I started going to the professional space, every single company that I worked in, I was part of creating a Latino presence, whether it's presenting myself as an advocate on Latino issues, as a volunteer or within the company, whether it was creating affinity groups, or whether it was actually trying to get some knowledge around marketing to the Latino community, therefore creating an expertise in the Latino space, which added value. So it's always been a part of me, but to be able to be hired to head up an organization that connects directly with my culture helped me really take all of my experiences, all of those ups and downs, that experience of being an immigrant that I didn't even become a citizen until I was 28 years old, 29 years old, of the bias that I faced when I went and said I want to go to college, and the high school counselor laughed at me, actually chuckled in my face and said, "Why would you bother going to college? Just get a job." So all of those things I bring with me every single day. The jobs that I had in between, waiting tables, baling hay, because I was in the middle of very rural areas. All of those things are part of my experience and part of my DNA in the work that I do. I also think it's very important to allow everyone to define themselves. As a community, we need to tell our stories. We need to have our own narrative. It just needs to be broader and broader and broader. And we need to listen to our community. I'm very proud of doing these charlas on identity, where we actually listen to our community present about what their identity is. We look at these lenses that we see ourselves through and present those. We've done it with ERGs. We've done them with youth. We do them with ourselves to make sure that not only everybody else understands it, but that we understand ourselves. And it's complex. My kids are Latino Filipino, growing up in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It's a very different environment. They don't really speak Spanish. I don't know how much they identify. I know, again, it changes. I know they hated me shoving Latino-ness down their throats when they were very young, but now I see them wearing T-shirts that show off their identity, that show off their cultural pride. So it has changed. But how it's very personal how they see themselves in terms of the Filipino side of it, in terms of gender, in terms of being, if that was the case, not speaking Spanish, and all of these other things that they need to formulate themselves. And that's very important for us to understand that as a community, we are everyone, and everyone is us. We look like everyone, we sound like everyone, and everyone looks and sounds like us. And in part of that, we need to make sure to understand that when we talk about social justice and a lot of these issues of racism and homophobia and sexism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and all these different areas, colorism, that we have to battle that in our own community. And that activism starts when we're at our own kitchen tables with our own family members that are saying things that maybe culturally accepted. Sometimes it's like terms of endearment hiding, masked by terms of endearment. They're not. They're offensive things that we need to bring up and not tolerate at any level. And that includes when we're professionals and being in certain rooms. You don't have to be a woman to stand up against sexism. You don't have to be a Black to stand up against racism, or Asian to stand up against racism. You don't have to be LGBTQ plus to stand up against homophobia and all of these other biases. We are depending on allies, and we're depending on ourselves. 1 out of 5 Latinos identifies as being of African American race or Asian race or Native. We have to look at that and say, this is our community we're fighting for. When we did a survey of our network, 1 out of 3 didn't identify as straight. I mean, this is how we have to look at that definition of ourselves. It's so important that we define ourselves, but we need to define ourselves in a broader sense, and take a look at ourselves in terms of how we are handling some of these social justice issues within our own community, and of course, in support of other communities outside of it. It has also been a great joy in leading this organization that we're able to do some amazing things in terms of dealing with some of these identity issues. For instance, we are about to launch with Minecraft the first Latino game that's themed with Minecraft. And it's dealing with issues of identity, leadership, for in the areas of career development, and as well as in the social justice space. I can't talk too much more about it because it'll launch on September 15th, I believe. But just know that, again, my experience are now being able to be radiated through the programming that we do. And with the Hispanic Heritage Awards that we're doing with PBS and at the Kennedy Center, we're able to present Latino leadership on the grandest stage as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, which is year round. But we're able to launch a year round of Latine through that amazing program that'll complete 35 years this year, which commemorates 35 years of Hispanic Heritage Month being created in this country, because it happened at the same time out of the White House in 1988. But that allows us to celebrate, again, the differences within our culture and the synergies in our culture, and invite everyone to come in and be Latino. Our programs are based on a cultural thread going through all of them. When we're teaching 100,000 kids how to code through Code as a Second Language, we also do it in Spanish. We also do it in a setting where a lot of times we're doing jam sessions and we have music playing, and that music reflects our culture. We want to make sure that everything is engaging and inviting and makes everyone feel comfortable. We're doing a program right now where we're teaching the whole course on workforce development in the tech space for thousands of Latinos that might not have been able to go to college, or maybe even or got their GEDs or didn't even graduate from high school. If they pass an assessment, they're able to go through this boot camp that we have, and we'll have a job that'll be at around $75,000, which could have an impact on generational poverty in a lot of our communities, and certainly in a lot of families. We just want to continue. I mean, the spirit of everything we do is, I love being naive. These are usually negatives, by the way. I love being naive enough to think that we can change something, audacious enough to try. I like being able to be impatient with the change that we want to see. I don't want to be patient with someone not having access to technology when they're 3 years old, and somebody that has that access has an advantage of them as a child in terms of education, and at some point workforce development and connectivity, and being able to organize. I mean, it all starts there. And to be able to have that, be able to get out there and advocate on behalf of our community in terms of access to education, to workforce opportunities, to ability to organize, to ability to create. We need more content creators. And we want to continue to attack some of these challenges that are out there, and also be able to embrace what are those solutions, because we're part of the solution as a community. Doing this work after all these years, I cling to some things that are often seen as a negative, but I want to challenge everyone out there to be more impatient with your activism, with the changes that you want to see. I want to challenge us to be naive in approaching problems, and to be a little more reckless. I've always said that in order to create something, you have to be able to break something, be willing to, and we need to have those tenets of being able to innovate, and you have to have those elements. Not be afraid to fail. Be collaborative. I've had a lot of people say to me, you're in everybody's lane. Well, let's carpool. And we're all trying to get to the same place. So that is my challenge, that what's going to make us solve some of these issues and move forward is to be more creative, collaborative, and with a lot of impatience, a lot of recklessness, and a lot of naivete, because we have to believe in ourselves and believe in each other and believe in our community. And I've always said that everything that you imagine can be real as long as it has action behind it. So in the word activist, the word act are the first three letters. And I want all of us to spend more time acting in terms of solving some of these issues that we're all taking on.